Hello, welcome to Queering Culture. Today I am your host, Sieb, and my co-host is Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian. Pleasure to be here.
Today we are talking about the film auteur Luca Guadagnino, focusing on his Desire trilogy, I Am Love, 2009, A Bigger Splash, 2015, and Call Me By Your Name, 2017. Luca Guadagnino was born in Sicily, Italy in 1971. His first film was The Protagonists in 1999, starring Tilda Swinton. He directed and wrote the film I Am Love, also starring Tilda Swinton, which gained him acclaim on an international scale, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Costume Design and a Golden Globe nomination for the Best Foreign Film. In the past 20 years, Luca Guadagnino has directed, written, and or produced over 20 films. He has 2 films releasing in 2024. His film Challengers, starring Zendaya, came out in April, and his film Queer, starring Daniel Craig, is currently in post-production. Brian, why don't you give us a little intro on your thoughts about these films?
So, Luca Guadagnino's Desire trilogy is a trilogy about the primal forces of desire in our lives and all the positives and negatives that accompany it. It elicits a lot of, sensations via images and sounds that are very hard to ignore. It's very powerful technical filmmaking.
Thank you. All right, so we're first going to start off with I Am Love. I Am Love follows a Russian woman who has married into this very rich Italian family, and at this point she is a mother of several adult children, and she begins a love affair with one of her son's best friends, who also happens to be a chef. The son and his chef friend are planning to open up a restaurant together until desire, for lack of better word, kind of comes in the way of everything. Brian, what were your thoughts about this film?
I thought it was a very well-made film. At first I was a bit off-put because the entire environment felt quite sterile at first. There didn't feel to be a lot of warmth. It was very sort of... the camera felt like it was looking for something. It was... And I later learned that it was yearning. The opening sequence is of Tilda Swinton's character in the aristocratic Italian family's home, and there's a lot of decadence, luxury. Yet there didn't feel as if there was a complete element to it. And as the film goes on, and she begins falling for the chef, you see that. You start to feel happier. There's a warmth. There's a element that, like, she finds what she was missing in what was the beginning of the film.
Yeah. You talked about lingering. I think that's something that I've noticed with a lot of, with all 3 of these films, is the camera always lingers. It lingers on people's faces or on their hands as they move, the places that they were before they moved. And I think that's like a style that I really like about Luca Guadagnino, because it keeps, I don't know, it just has this air about it that, he loves to have like very like harsh close-ups of like Italian architecture or like nature, things like that, and it just creates kind of this like beauty around them. So while like it's, like you said, it's kind of sterile in the beginning, the music and the filmmaking, however, like are, I don't know, they have a feeling to them as soon as the film starts.
Right.
I don't know how really to describe it, but and there's the music kind of keeps these transitions between scenes going.
It serves as a very good thread in between moving images and scenes. Absolutely. Yeah, there's the close-ups on the Italian architecture, art, the very wonderful, set and craftsmanship that goes into it. It shows off the wealth and history of this family and this country, yet it doesn't fulfill you because it's not filled with sort of joy or love or happiness. It's very, I'm not sure if the right word is bureaucratic, but it seems more obligational than it does. It doesn't fulfill Emma, and you feel that.
Yeah. One scene that kind of is popping out to me at the moment is when, they're all at the table and the grandfather is going to basically name who the benefactors are of his of his company.
Yeah, the successors.
Yeah, the successors. And but it's also his birthday, and so they're all kind of celebrating, and one of his granddaughter gives him like a painting, or he thinks it's a painting, and he starts kind of talking about how like, oh, like she's this great painter and she's so amazing, and then he gets a photograph that she made or that she took, and he kind of is just like, oh.
Yeah, he's very dismissive.
He's like, well, you still owe me a painting, or like kind of. So there's definitely this like, I feel like within these families there is so much love, but it's kind of obligatory.
It's conditional.
Yeah, a little bit. And but I do think that Emma's character, she loves her children. Oh. And I think we see that with her daughter specifically. Absolutely. Because her daughter comes out essentially to her, and she is very accepting, and and you can just see like how much she does care and how much she does love her children, even though she's not necessarily fulfilled within her role.
Yeah, her family means her children mean everything to her. When she discovers the note in the dry cleaning, in many, you would say, American films, there would be a moment of, you were this, why didn't you tell me? There'd be a dramatic conflict. But no, she walks, she contemplates, and she's highly empathetic. She thinks about how, if she's able to be here, she sort of takes the feelings that her daughter has written, and she sort of integrates them, takes them within herself, and accepts her daughter without any element of external conflict. But there's definitely an internal conflict for sure. Yeah,
it makes me wonder if she's kind of thinking in that moment, like, I guess I don't know if that moment she's met Antonio yet, but her thinking like, if I can, if she can find this within herself to be happy, then maybe I can too, kind of thing.
Yeah, she met Antonio briefly when he stopped at the door. She said hello. Yeah. But I'd say they truly meet each other when she goes into the restaurant and tastes the food, because that changes everything. She feels that
she's like awakened.
That's an extreme turning point in the rest of the film, because it's like the awakening of her sensorium in a way, you could say. Like touch, taste, scent, like any sort of sense goes into that, and it's a very powerful scene.
Yes, yeah. And when she talks to him after, and I think about it, because like, instead of she could just have left, that restaurant with her mother-in-law, and yet she's like, give me 1 second. She goes back. She's like, you can see the way she's already being pulled towards him and not quite maybe realizing it yet. And we really see that happen in that one scene where she's like chasing him through this city.
Yeah, with the jazz-fueled soundtrack in the back.
Yeah, and that's what I also mean, like the music just like fuels the emotions that the characters are already feeling. And it really emphasized in that scene the way that like she's being pulled with this desire, and it's like within her control, but not quite within her control. Like she's being pulled in this direction where I think she's kind of like, oh, like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I feel like I have to. Like, I gotta follow him. Like, I gotta keep going. Yeah. And I think that just kind of really shows the way that, like, desire has this pull on all of us to kind of maybe do things we wouldn't have thought that we would ever do.
Oh,
maybe,
exactly. I think it's worth noting as well that the jazz is a very important choice, because it's new. Jazz is not, how do you say, like it's fluid, but it's not as structured as, say, classical. The beginning of the film is very classical piano, resembling the aristocracy. And when she sees Antonio and that chase sequence happens, it's jazz, it's new, it's the moving away from old to new, the transition of, time and tradition. And with what you brought up earlier, the scene with the picture, it's the grandfather who is very old. He's resembling the old world. He's unable to accept the new, which is the granddaughter, who we immediately learn after that scene, or that sequence, is she is lesbian. And I think those two work very well together.
Yeah. Eduardo and his mother have a very interesting relationship. They're very close. And I guess what I'm thinking about is that, betrayal that happens between them, because Antonio is Eduardo's, best friend, and they're going to start this, relationship, or, not this relationship, but this partnership, yes, this entrepreneurial partnership together. And the way that everything seems like it's kind of going well, and you even see that during that conversation between Eduardo's future wife, his fiance, I think at the time, and the two mothers. She goes, I don't know if this is a good idea, and then Emma's you don't basically telling her he knows what he's doing, kind of definitely believes in him, where maybe the fiance can't quite see the vision.
Eduardo and Emma's relationship is fascinating because they have a deep love for one another. And Eduardo, he has the keys to the company. He's doing the best he can. Throughout your time with Eduardo, you learn that he's very empathetic. He wants to help people. He's looking out for the smaller men in the factory. He's we fired too many workers. With Antonio, he wants to support Antonio's dream of opening the restaurant. He's very supportive and helping. And when he discovers that Emma and Antonio are having their affair, or he begins to suspect it, then later is confirmed, you see all that kindness just turn very bitter and angry, and the poor man ends up hitting his head and falling into the pool. But it's interesting. I think it's fascinating to see he sort of his desire has never been inhibited. And that was something I was thinking about, because with his fiance, he dated her. His family considered her an outsider, even though Emma herself was an outsider in a way. But they don't ever stop him. And helping the restaurant, even though it's not a savvy business idea, wanting to help people, his desire is never inhibited. Yet he gets upset with Emma when the one time she exhibits desire in an unhappy situation. It's understandable why he takes it as portrayal and gives into anger. Yet there's a sort of hypocrisy there in that his ability to enact his desire, he cannot empathize with Emma for wanting to do anything on her own accord. And so that element of hypocrisy is structural. It could play into gender dynamics, and I think that's another element of the class disparity that Luca Guadagnino is always playing in the background.
Yeah, I think with that family, it's very interesting because they do seem very loving in so many ways, and yet there's little things that you kind of pick up on that feel like little jabs, or Eduardo's the black sheep of the family. He's kind of doing things that they're you're doing great, but they kind of are talking about him behind his back a little bit, oh, but he's losing, or he's not doing well, or he shouldn't have gotten the family business. And I think that Eduardo gets that the empathy that you talked about from Emma in so many ways. They're both very similar.
We talked earlier about love being conditional, especially the grandfather and the granddaughter. One of the most powerful scenes, I believed, was after Eduardo's death. Emma is in the church grounds, and her husband comes in, he hugs her, he's comforting her, telling her it'll be all right. And he says, I'm in love with Antonio. The birds fly, all the sound in the space is just sort of being played, and he stares at her and he says, "You are nothing." Their entire relationship, there's scenes where they're in bed, there's scenes where, they're going about the house. As I said earlier, it's a very sterile environment.
Yeah.
Yet, in that moment, it's the one time you really see him empathize with her, comfort her, show a semblance of emotional care.
Yeah.
And as soon as the conditions he wants her to follow are broken, "You are nothing, you mean nothing to me." And so, goodness, that was that was a very, what I believe, like a keystone in the film of that family dynamic, and what some people think is sort of love is very conditional, and but her desire with Antonio her relationship with Antonio is unconditional.
Do you think, like, with the ending of that film with her leaving, what did you think about that?
It was very dramatic, obviously. The music was, rising to a crescendo. The maid was crying. The daughter seemed to be the only one who accepted her, because she had undergone a similar process of doing away with what everyone expected of her and following her heart. And you see that she's very happy. After she does that, she cuts her hair. She's always smiling. Yeah. And I think she gained so much pride for her mother for finally getting out of this situation, which had been sort of draining her for so long. And it's funny juxtaposing the line, "You are nothing," with her just vanishing. Yeah. And it's her being gone is more of a damage to that family than it is a damage to her for leaving the family. Yeah. And I thought that was very, very well done. I think it's very, she's free now.
All right. A Bigger Splash. This is the second film in the Desire trilogy, and it follows Marianne, a kind of Bowie-like singer. And
very much so.
Yes, has a lot of those same, vibes to her. And her boyfriend, I don't know if they're anything more than boyfriends, right? Or like they have a relationship.
They're partners.
Yeah, they're partners kind of in life, but they're not married.
No.
Yeah. His name is Paul, and the other two characters is Marianne's like kind of ex-flame, who used to kind of manage her singing career. His name is Harry, and his daughter
in question.
Yeah, daughter in question, Penelope. So this dynamic already is incredibly interesting. It starts off, basically, Marianne has just gotten vocal surgery, and so she can pretty much not talk at all at the moment. She can kind of whisper, and that's about it. Paul is, taking care of her at the moment, which he has taken on that role in a way because Marianne is taking care of him in a lot of ways as well. Right. Harry is pretty bitter, so Marianne and Paul are together in an Italian villa, and she's basically just recovering from the surgery when Harry and his daughter Penelope decide that they want to come visit, or that they are visiting, and Marianne kind of invites them, "Oh, like, you're here, come stay with us." Right. And yeah, anything else about kind of those dynamics between them?
Well, Harry sort of forces him and Penelope into their house. It's sort of, he kind of invites himself, and they sort of go, "Well, I guess we have to."
Yeah,
out of obligation. Kinda. Yeah, it's a very interesting. There's so much underlying tension already. Yeah. Between each individual relationship.
Yeah. Oh, and Paul and Harry used to be best friends.
Great friends.
And then Harry was like, to Paul, basically, "You should meet Marianne. Marianne's great. We're over, and like, you guys would be great for each other." Right. And Paul's like, "Don't do that, man. Like, like, you're still like in love with her." Yeah. And Harry's like, no, go on, like, go talk to her, and and then Paul and Marianne get together, and then Harry is like, "Oh fuck, what did I do?" kind of. Right. But he's also kind of a guy that doesn't want to be tied down in a lot of ways. He's very like high on life.
Right.
high on other things too, probably,
Oh, yes.
but very like, he just wants to kind of have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that comes in some immature and selfish ways,
Right.
I think.
We had talked about this earlier,
Yeah.
and I have met people in the vein of Harry, and it's very fascinating because Harry wants to do whatever he wants when he wants, and he calls it freedom, but really it's not in a way. It's he invites people over and he wants to woo them. He goes and he rallies all the Italian people for karaoke. He wants to do what he wants when he wants all the time, and there's a sort of sexual power he wants over people.
Yeah.
He wants to engage in sexual activity with whoever he would like. And with Marianne, she was sort of, the crown jewel. And once he gave her up, and she was no longer beholden to him, he could not stand it, and he wants her back as a sort of way of regaining his power over her. He always says it's about love or desire, how much he cares about her, but you can tell when he had her, he did not appreciate her whatsoever when he had her in his life, and it's very fascinating. And so I look at Harry with the lens of sex is very much so like a power dynamic with him.
Yeah. Yeah, the dynamic between all three of them throughout the film is very interesting. Because Paul and Harry kind of still get along, but then kind of also hate each other. It's kind of this weird, like, brotherly love where they're like, I hate you, but I kind of love you too. I don't know. It's
friendship with boiling tension underneath.
Yeah. Do you think that they have sexual tension as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's intentional on the part of Luca.
Yeah.
Because
we know that Harry is queer. They mention it at some point, like, oh, he'll get with anybody or, any type of person kind of thing. So, and I do like in a way that it's not like, oh, like, in all of Luca Guadagnino's films, it's never, like, a problem that someone is queer.
Never.
Even in, like, I Am Love, where, like, acceptance and things like that, like, it's a thought process, but it's not, like, I can't look at you, or like, in some queer films where it's like homophobia is like the plot. Homophobia really has no plot in any of these films.
No. Yes.
Yeah.
I see that. I didn't truly, actually, now that you bring it up, I see it a lot more. Luca enjoys sort of melting boundaries in a way, or just sort of playing them, keeping them, he jumps rope with it, really.
Yeah, keeping it fluid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, even definitely in this film, as well as the other ones, sensuality of, like, summer is very important. Like, the Italian landscape, the beauty of, like, it in summer, everything's in bloom, like, the birds are chirping, the grass is moving, the bees are buzzing. It really creates this, like, really just intense, like, vibrant air within the films.
Right.
And in A Bigger Splash, like, there's a lot of, they're in the pool, they're hiking, they're lounging, they're in the city walking. Definitely, I think even in like the opening clips kind of, just really showcase that. And like the food is also, like a big piece kind of where, they're out and they're eating food, and like the camera's really like focusing on the way that the food is being cut or made or tapped into in some way, and it's very sensual. The camera will, and like everything's very sensual. The camera will focus on like Penelope's arm as she drags it across the table, or like as someone leaves, it'll linger as they go. I don't know, that filmmaking is just so like sensual in itself that it, even when the characters maybe are in this like state of tension, there's still this like sensuality within it, I think.
Absolutely. There's a sort of the enticement of risk and danger in sensuality, and the human body is something Luca loves to talk about, or show, I should say.
Yeah. I think Paul and Harry is just such an interesting dynamic, and like when Harry's speaking with Marianne, like he talks badly about Paul a lot.
Often.
Like, there's one quote, he's like, he's square, he's all cuddly and built for hibernating with, but he's stuck. Or he's put a bell around your neck. And Marianne over and over just kind of not defends him, but, you know, like, I'm glad that he did. Like, glad that he's in her life, is glad that she's with him, and continues to express that to Harry. And I think that just makes Harry more and more upset. Like,
she brushes Harry's words aside.
Yes.
It's less so than as if she hates what he's saying.
Yeah.
It's more so indifference. Yeah. And hate he can take. Indifference he cannot.
Yeah, he wants control, and if he can get her to get in a reaction, he wants, that is something about Harry. He wants a reaction to what he does. And even the way that, like, he is, like, dancing with Penelope, his daughter, in a weirdly sexual way, it's all for a reaction, I feel like. Right. And then when somebody does kind of say something, he's like, I can do whatever I want. He's a little weird about his daughter in a way, because, like, he doesn't actually really know her. She's just some...
It's very new to him.
...girl that all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm your dad. And she's also a very, like, sexual character, even though she's, like... We don't know that she's a minor.
Until much later.
Yeah, because she lies and she's like, I'm 22. And then at the end, it's like, she's 17. Right. It's like, oh, fuck.
Well, you were saying about Harry and Paul, they act as great foils to one another. Harry's very loud and rambunctious. He's always, stripping or inciting. He's always sort of breaking typical convention to draw attention to himself and sort of gain power in that way, where Paul is very muted. He's very quiet, especially when you learn his history with substance abuse, his accident / potential suicide attempt, and all that going on. And them as foils to each other, the passive versus the active, is fantastic. And there's also stuff to be talked about with Penelope and Marianne being good foils for each other as well. And you talked about Marianne's voice earlier. Silence. Yeah. She's voiceless. Yeah. And Harry and Paul, they have very loud voices. And Penelope chooses not to speak, but Marianne physically can't.
Yeah. The silence is such an interesting piece of this film, because her choice has kind of been stripped from her in a way. Her vocalization of choice. Sometimes, like, she ends up having to just go with things because she can't exactly say no. Right. Especially when Harry's like, oh, like, we're like this or that, or, trying to just get things going. She kind of doesn't really, she's not able to, like, really say much. And Paul continues to try to, speak for her, I think, like, even when they first meet and they go out, to that little, like, countryside, like, restaurant, Harry keeps talking to Marianne, and Marianne's like, I can't speak back, basically, like, signaling, like, she can't speak. And then Paul's like, dude, she can't speak. Stop trying to get her to speak. Yeah. So, Paul is very, like, defensive of Marianne, and I think that tension just continues to build. Like, at first he's like, Harry's kind of a pain in my butt, but he's whatever. But as the week or however many days they're together goes on, like, his anger clearly continues to build. Right. And then, like, him knowing that, like, Harry tried to, like, be with Marianne and do those things, and clearly, like, angers him a lot.
Right. Paul's annoyance turns to frustration, turns to hatred. Yeah. And I think that follows his character arc very well, with him starting to be muted. And then later on, when Penelope arguably seduces him at the beach, they have their tension, through several scenes before that. Yet that scene is up to interpretation. But I think that the implication, to me, I think they ended up, doing things together. Then he comes back, and his scars are opened, also after the pool scene. But that dinner scene, where after Harry forces himself onto Marianne, and it's questionable what you were witnessing during that scene, in its own way, that's the first dinner where Paul is energetic, as if he's younger. He sort of gets this youthful vibrance back to him. And Harry especially hates that.
Yeah.
And so that dynamic is fascinating. And both of those pairings realize that the other people something has happened between them. And that's the beginning of the end.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's a great introduction to kind of the ending here where, so much to say. I mean, we see that Paul has kind of broken his sobriety, and as well as Harry coming back incredibly drunk to go nude swimming in the pool.
As he does.
Yes, which already kind of a bad idea, going swimming drunk in the middle of the night. And, and then they kind of both see each other and start kind of instigating one another. Which, culminates in this kind of tragedy where Paul lacks impulse control and kind of lets his feelings get out to the point where, Harry dies.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
I think that pool sequence is a wonderful sort of visual display of their entire relationship and just kind of how their entire arc went. It started off fairly cordial, tension rose, they fall into the pool, and it bounces between hatred and violence, and then immediately when he realizes Harry is dying, he tries to save him. And so that element of hatred and love, which is kind of what the entire film plays into, desire, hatred, love, visually, and just the tension and the overhead camera just following that, going underwater, seeing Ray Fiennes' face sort of lose life, and then Paul trying to resurrect Harry. It doesn't work.
I didn't feel like he tried that hard, though. Like, he maybe gave, like, 2 breaths. He didn't even try compressions. Like, he didn't pull him out of the water. He just let him sink.
But that's also them kissing. He's showing them that he did have love for him.
Yeah.
In a way. And so it's a very dramatic Italian way of doing it. And it was a very powerful scene. And then immediately Paul runs. He tries to, wash his hands of the blood.
Yeah. I think it's such an interesting way to deal with death that I think we see in a lot of films of people, like, kind of realizing what they've done and running from it or running from themselves to try to, hide what they've done. We can see, like, Marianne picks up on it. She realizes pretty quick that, like, he might have had something to do with this. I don't think she doesn't hate him for it, though. I think she knows that, like, Harry must have instigated heavily in many ways for that to have happened.
There's an interesting element of both understanding and grief that Marianne shows. She's upset, yet she understands.
Yeah. And she obviously doesn't want him to get caught.
Right. Penelope's position is very fascinating in both. She doesn't know fully if Harry is her father. She talks about getting the paternity test.
Yeah.
We learn that she can speak Italian.
We learned so much about her in the last, like,
25 minutes or so.
Yeah, like, she's not really who she says she is. She's not 22, she's 17. She knows several languages. She's actually incredibly educated. When she kind of presents herself in the beginning as kind of just, like, a little dumb and ditzy. Not ditzy per se, but she's very, like, sensual. She's just kind of like, I'm an adult, and
she's very Machiavellian. She sort of sees the game that is being played, and she
just kind of watches.
She watches and then makes moves at certain times to get what she wants.
She is very mature in some ways for that she ends up being 17, which is, I think, why nobody suspected that she was lying about her age.
Right.
And one final thing I think is, like, that slap scene at the end when Marianne slaps Penelope at the airport.
Right.
That was really interesting to me. Like, I think obviously Marianne is, like, has just dealt with this death of, a lover that she had, and a good friend that she had for most of her life. And clearly, like, she can't express her anger to Paul, but she does end up taking it out on Penelope.
Right.
When Penelope really was just going along, like, kind of along for the ride. Like, Harry was just, she just brought her, and she's kind of like, my mother just sends me off with people, and, like, she's just kind of there,
Right.
like, observing and watching and waiting, and I don't know.
I think that was fascinating because that's the first instance of parenting in a way, or discipline. Even though you shouldn't
Yeah, you shouldn't hit your
slap
kids,
somebody.
but
It's the first time you see Penelope be sort of
disciplined in some
disciplined
way.
in
Yeah.
some form. And there were scenes in which, well, she asks Penelope at one point, "Is there a problem with me?" And Penelope, is sort of evasive in that question. She asks, Marianne asks Penelope earlier, like, "Oh, do you see Paul's scar?" And she says yes. So there was built up tension over time, and as well as the current situation and all the stress that comes with that. She can't hit Paul because Paul's all she has left. So she just takes all out into Penelope. There's an element of jealousy. Penelope has a strong voice, especially now that she knows Italian. It could be jealousy for her youth, her power over Paul, her everything that Penelope sort of represents. Marianne could find an element of jealousy of, or just takes out her frustration on that. And yeah, it's very similar in a way to Paul and Harry's mutual frustrations.
Yeah.
And before we moved on, I thought a very powerful, well, very important scene. No, I shouldn't say powerful. It is when Harry and Marianne, he sort of forces himself on her, and they, they're with one another physically, and he says he has a bell around your neck. That moment to me, I saw as a very jealous moment, because here he is physically, restricting her, forcing her, whatever, and he is jealous of the fact that Paul has more control over her than he does of Marianne in that moment.
Because he can't force her to love him.
No.
He can only entice her sexually, but he knows that he can't make her love him
Right.
the way that she loves Paul.
Yeah.
And he hates that.
Right. In that moment, I would argue is just that shows Harry for what he is, and in all the sort of kind of lack of empathy and sort of filth to his nature.
Yeah, he's not a great role model.
But yeah, very powerful film, and it's interesting because it's a remake of La Piscine, the French film with Romy Schneider and Alain Delon, and seeing Luca Guadagnino take that into an Italian setting and blurry the roles and positions of the characters even more to get at something slightly different.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful use of adaptation.
All right, Call Me by Your Name. Beautiful film. My favorite film, probably.
Of the trilogy?
Of the trilogy, of my life.
Really?
I mean, this movie has just like a place in my heart. I don't know if I'd call it like. It's probably one of my favorite films, probably of all time.
Right.
I think I relate so heavily to Elio, and just it's such just a beautiful film. Like, and I was so happy when I came across I Am Love, because as soon as it started, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the same thing. Like, the music started, and it's that same orchestral, like, do, like, and I was like, and then it started with like the architecture, and I was like, yes, this is it. And of course, like, I Am Love was great, but it will not come close to Call Me by Your Name for me in my heart. But basically, Call Me by Your Name is a story about a young Italian boy. He's 17, Elio, and he's spending the summer with his parents in their Italian villa in Italy. They normally, I believe, live in the United States.
Yes.
Or is it France?
I believe the United States.
Yeah, but they are an Italian family as well, and they spend their summers in this villa. Their summers, their winters, their holidays, and they are a Jewish family, although they don't really express that there because it's not quite as accepted in where they are.
Right.
And Elio's father, is a professor, and he basically every summer he takes a grad student in for the summer for like 6 weeks or so, I think, and they've kind of come and go in Elio's life without kind of having too much meaning until that final summer where this story begins with Oliver coming in to live with them and to study with Elio's father. And in the beginning, they kind of have this tension of back in, Oliver takes over Elio's room, and he kind of has this very American nature of see you later,
He's going to do what he does.
He's kind of off on his own, and Elio is kind of clearly likes him, but he's like, oh, he's kind of rude, or he's kind of off-putting in some way to kind of, I don't know. And, obviously as they progress, they become friends, they get closer, and they kind of begin an affair. I don't know if you'd call it an affair per se. I don't know what the definition of an affair is, but they become lovers in a way, and spend those short time that they have left together. And it's a story of first love of Elio. It's very focused on Elio's perspective of this first love and this desire and this, he's never felt anything like this before. And for Oliver, it's not quite the same. He likes Elio, and he's clearly interested in Elio, but he's better at hiding himself,
right,
in some ways. You talked about that. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think very great introduction, first of all, but so Elio, the film is from his perspective, and so there's the awakening, there's a sort of light and purity in how the film is shown, the beauty of the landscape, the family, the love, it's all very present. And when Oliver shows up, there's a slight disruption, but then he very quickly integrates into that sort of, the sort of pure world that Elio is in. Mm-hmm. And just the dynamic of Elio being so young, and it being, a golden summer, and his first real love, and Oliver being 24 and having experienced a bit more life, especially in a very different world. Elio's image of Oliver is very different from Oliver's image of Elio.
Yeah.
And maybe because it's in the United States in the 80s, I'm not sure exactly where Oliver is from, but he has to get used to hiding himself more in America than Elio would have to in Italy, in a way. Mm-hmm. In Call Me By Your Name, there's the openly gay couple that Elio calls Sonny and Cher.
Yeah.
And even though there's some criticism towards them just by naturally being in a homosexual relationship, they can still be free and be themselves in that world. Oliver isn't afforded that back in America.
Yeah, if you think about it, the 80s, the AIDS epidemic, mm-hmm. And when we see with the ending, him just kind of, he's moved on. It meant something to him, but it meant everything to Elio.
Yeah. Oliver remembers everything, but Elio still feels everything.
Yeah. I love the way that, everything's kind of, their conversations are very, not I don't know how to say, like, not like incognito, kind of like they're speaking in rhymes almost. Like they're not saying exactly what they mean, but they both understand what they're saying.
Right.
And the specific instance that I can think of is when they've ridden into the city, into this town for Oliver to go, send his manuscripts or something like that.
Not bad, huh?
Not bad at all. Thought you didn't smoke.
I don't. So World War II, huh?
Oh, no, this is World War One. You have to be at least 80 years old to have known any of them.
I never even heard of the Battle of Piave.
Battle of Piave is one of the most lethal battles in World War One. 170,000 people died.
Is there anything you don't know?
I know nothing, Oliver.
Well, you seem to know more than anybody else around here.
Well, if you only knew how little I know about the things that matter.
What things that matter?
You know what things.
Why are you telling me this?
Because I thought you should know.
Because you thought I should know?
Because I wanted you to know. 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 Because there's no one else I can say this to but you.
You saying what I think you're saying?
They're picking their words so carefully.
Don't go anywhere. Stay right here.
You know I'm not going anywhere.
Elio doesn't know if Oliver is gay, if Oliver likes him like that. I don't think Elio quite knows what he feels exactly, but he knows he feels desire. So he's like, if only I knew what things that mattered.
Right.
Yeah.
All of their interactions are packed with subtext and the sort of hidden language that you have to say when you're, hiding yourself from the world because the world won't accept you. And so I think that the way that they speak and how they pick their words so intently, as you said, very precisely, is how they have to craft their identity to fit in with the world. And so they're trying to see, like, are you hiding as well? And there's kinship in that.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about the music in this scene, and I'll go more into the music later, but as we see, like, this film is from Elio's perspective, the music, I mean, Elio's passion is music,
right,
and specifically classical music, and transcribing music, and but the music that plays is often youthful and more playful than the other films. Mm-hmm. It's light and airy and this summer. I don't know how to...
Full of joy.
Yeah. But also sadness. Like there's Sufjan Stevens is the one who created most of the music for this film, and in those moments of sadness and that these moments of sadness that Elio feels are just exasperated. Is that the right word? Like brought out
right,
in like this emotion in him, and like the music always kind of is emphasizing Elio's emotions.
Yeah, very much so. The music playing is very much so a direct line to what Elio's feeling. The How to See Without My Eyes, that song, when they're going through nature. The ending song's playing when he's going through all the stages of grief and loss and love, longing, hatred. That all of those emotions just being shown through music and Timothée Chalamet's facial expressions. Very well done. As life goes on behind him.
Yeah. Very
devastating scene. And the music plays perfectly with that moment and all the moments before.
Yeah, I think this film, like, something we also wanted to talk about was kind of that power dynamic between the two of them. Because Desire within this film doesn't care that there's this power dynamic. But there's definitely this... It's hard for Elio to see the way that Oliver has much more experience in life. And we see, like, in some ways, like, the way that Oliver just kind of clicks with a lot of the locals. Like, he brings him to this pub, and everyone's like, Oliver! Hey. You know, and he's like, you know, ciao. And Elio's like, how do you even know these guys? Like, and, you know, he clicks with the people playing volleyball, and he's very outgoing and clearly pulls Elio in where Elio's more solitary. He likes spending his time swimming or, you know, doing music. He likes going out, but he's definitely more of a solitary guy, for sure. What were your thoughts on, like, the power dynamics?
Well, I think it's fascinating that Oliver is always going out and meeting people. There's an element of him wanting to be accepted. And the only person who really does that is Elio, and arguably Elio's parents, because they like Oliver. But the power dynamic, we talked about this before, it starts off with Oliver not wanting to engage with Elio in that way because he's reserved in that element of his life. And Elio sort of pushes it. He invites him to a secret spot in the pond, them going to nature. He kind of puts his hand on his lower region, you know.
There's this loss of innocence in nature.
Yes.
In all of the films.
Yes.
Well, most of the films, yeah.
Yes.
Or, no, all three, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's this element of nature is wild and beautiful and desire. I don't know, it just kind of brings out the element of maybe secrecy, too. Of, like, nobody knows. You're
allowed to be yourself in nature as you were born, as you were intended, in a way. Yeah. And in civilization, you have to hide who you are.
Exactly.
The power dynamic, though, it starts off with Elio pushing Oliver to do it. And then once they give in, Oliver is the one who has power. Yeah. He controls the relationship, how it works. There's a saying that goes, the one who is willing to leave the relationship controls it. And Oliver, once that begins, sort of dictates how it all goes. And Elio plays second fiddle in a way. And with the nature versus civilization element, one of the more jarring moments I found was when they go into town, and after the first few times they do, and they're by the post office, I believe, and they're talking. This is after they had slept together. Yes. And in the middle of the town, in front of all these people, Oliver goes, I am so happy we slept together. And I sort of
Wasn't this, they were kind of secluded though, right?
No, they were there's people behind them, there's people walking by, and he says, I'm so happy we slept together. And it's as if, there's a feeling as if it's kind of very beautiful in a way, because he's accepting in public that he accepts him, and he's so happy that they were able to find each other. Yet there's a danger in that. And it's that is happening in civilization, that mask slipped for a moment.
Yes. And then they do kind of seclude themselves after that, and and move away to, you know, like a more of an alley kind of spot. Sexuality is such an interesting part of this film, because there is that risk involved, but in a way there's still a lot of acceptance. Like, Elio's parents, they've gathered, and they don't care.
No.
And, you know, that conversation with Elio's father towards the end, such an interesting one.
Very powerful monologue. I'm a great fan
It's
of
my
it.
favorite monologue ever.
You're too smart not to know how rare, how special what you two had was.
Oliver was Oliver.
Parce que c'était lui. Parce que c'était moi.
Oliver made me very intelligent, but
He was more than intelligent. What you two had everything and nothing to do with intelligence. He was good. You were both lucky to have found each other because you too are good.
I think he was better than me. I think he was better than me.
I'm sure he'd say the same thing about you.
He'd say the same thing.
Which flatters you both. And when you least expect it, nature has cunning ways of finding our weakest spot. Just remember I'm here. Right now, you may not want to feel anything. Maybe you never wanted to feel anything. And, maybe it's not to me you'll want to speak about these things, but, feel something you obviously did. Look, you had a beautiful friendship. Maybe more than a friendship. And I envy you. My place, most parents would hope the whole thing goes away. Pray their sons land on their feet, but I am not such a parent. We rip out so much of ourselves to be cured of things faster that we go bankrupt by the age of 30 and have less to offer each time we start with someone new. But to make yourself feel nothing so as not to feel anything. What a waste. Have I spoken out of turn? And I'll say one more thing. It'll clear the air. I may have come close, but I never had what you two have. Something always held me back, or stood in the way. How you live your life is your business. Just remember, our hearts and our bodies are given to us only once. And before you know it, your heart's worn out. And as for your body, there comes a point when no one looks at it, much less wants to come near it. Right now, there's sorrow, pain. Don't kill it. And with it, the joy you felt. Does Mom know? I don't think she does.
That monologue we talked about, we had two different readings on it. And I read about this, and so Michael Stuhlbarg, who plays Elio's father, Sam, he read that monologue as if Sam was coming out as a gay man to his gay son.
Gotcha.
And creating a deeper relationship with that. And so when he says, I never had what you two had, I almost did, and Elio asking, does mom know that you're gay? And he goes, I don't think she does. And to me, that added so much to the film, all the relationships, and especially to Oliver and Elio. Elio is willing to be himself, be gay, like their family friends that come and visit. Yet Oliver is willing to, hide in plain sight, should we say.
Yeah.
And Sam is somebody, if we go with my reading, Sam is someone who does that. And so he understands Oliver in that way and is trying to help Elio understand. And that plays with why Sam was so upset. He was upset with Elio for making fun of the gay couple because he knows how difficult and devastating it is to come out and not be accepted by the world, and he wants to show his friends that he accepts them. And later, when Oliver calls to say that he's getting married, there's a moment in Michael Stuhlbarg's eyes where you can see he hurts hearing that, because he knows what it means for Oliver and him sort of choosing to be accepted by the world at large, and how that is sort of damaging. And then Elio, who will be devastated by Oliver's and him never being able to continue what they had. But you had a different reading on the monologue, which I would love for you to elaborate.
I mean, I just didn't quite pick up on that. I was reading it as he and Elio were talking about just love in general, not necessarily love with a man. So I thought he was kind of more just saying, like, I came close with somebody, of having that, like, kind of love, but it didn't work out. And he obviously loves his wife, but it's not the same. But I think that you're right in your reading of that scene. But I think in general, like, that whole monologue is just so devastating in so many ways, because it talks about, our bodies, and, we cut out, and, like, cutting out so much of yourselves to get rid of the pain of loving
and losing.
When he's telling Elio to just feel it, like, you feel it and you will heal, but you have to feel it. He's basically saying, like, you can't just shut off that part of yourself. Maybe he's kind of saying, shut off that part of yourself that I did, and I'm unhappy. And, like, he doesn't want the same for Elio. He wants him to feel that and to use that to fuel his life, to be who he is, rather than cutting out that part of himself so that he doesn't have to feel the pain.
Which is a very, very strong and powerful statement.
Yes, yeah.
It's also worth noting that the author of Call Me By Your Name, he disagreed with Michael Stuhlbarg's choice or statement.
Yes.
He said that, no, Sam's a straight man. Yeah,
so, because I've read Call Me By Your Name, and I began to read the sequel book by Andre Aciman, and I don't think I ever finished the second book. I just wasn't as interested, I think. Maybe I should finish it. I know that I probably should. But I don't believe that he ever intended to make Elio's father queer.
Right.
But I think when, they have this moment, it's him kind of saying that, like, you have to feel the love. Like, you have to feel the pain and feel the love and move through it and take it with you through life. Because if you just cut it out of yourself, you will have nothing left to give anybody else.
Yes.
Whether you're queer or not, is, I think, kind of more important in some ways.
No, I think that was a good way to put it. I think that was just a very powerful scene. It flows very well into the next part, where it's sort of the end. It's the final sequence. And it was just, it encompasses everything the film was saying. That love is beautiful, loss is devastating, yet it's something we must experience and not shut out, because it's that which makes us human. That ability to love, that ability to feel so deeply, and cutting that off makes us less human.
Okay, let's just kind of talk about the common themes about all three of these films. What makes it the Desire trilogy? Oh, and maybe I should also mention that it was not originally meant to be a trilogy. These three films were original, like, just separate films. The first two, Luca Guadagnino made, and then once he made Call Me By Your Name, he submitted it to the Sundance Festival. And once they asked for basically, like, they asked for something. They asked for... He was required to invent an appealing expression for the festival's press portfolio, and as a result, crowned it the final chapter of the Desire trilogy.
Right.
So...
Yeah, very similar to actually how Park Chan-wook made the Vengeance trilogy with Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. It wasn't originally supposed to be a trilogy, but someone asked him about it and he made it. But I find that for the Desire trilogy and the other Vengeance trilogy, both of them are just as valid as if it was made as three films. Yeah, and I think it's very powerful because it encompasses three different looks and explorations of the theme of desire. I think one commonality I found very powerful between them was how Luca frames the human body, sense, skin, flesh, especially in Call Me By Your Name. Body is sculpture. He was always juxtaposing these ancient Greek sculptures, Greco-Roman sculptures, as beautiful, natural pieces of exquisite art. And with how he guides the camera and motion and texture, light, and sense, it all culminates into the human body as a breathing, living piece of art.
Yeah, people are art.
People are art. And very much so in I Am Love and A Bigger, Deeper Splash, the body is extremely important. He's always showing, like, even when there's no sexual activity going on, the backless dresses of women, their arms, their hand motions, how they'll eat something, how they'll look at something. They are living pieces of art.
Yeah.
And his lens, in that sense, is so valuable in these films, and the tension and everything he's saying with images and sound.
Yeah, I agree. I think the senses are really brought out in all three of these films. Taste with the food.
Yes.
Touch. Every touch. I'm thinking of that scene in Call Me By Your Name where they're standing outside on the balcony of the villa, and they kind of the edges of their hands are kind of... I think Oliver sets his hand down on Elio's. Just every touch is amplified, as it's electric in a way, and I think that really emphasizes the desire, the energy flowing between two people, and the camera really captures this sensuality of even the environment that they're in. Everything is sensual. Everything inflicts your senses.
The heat, the light.
Yes, the summer, the bees are buzzing. There's birds chirping. There's the grass. You can hear the trees rustling. The wind, the water. Nothing is taken away. Everything is there, and every look between people, every lingering stare, it's almost as if it's someone watching this moment rather than a camera just sitting there capturing a moment.
Right.
It's the camera is someone watching and lingering, and I don't know how better to describe it, really.
No, I think that was very, perfect.
Yeah, but I also think that a theme that we see throughout these three films is that desire can be destructive.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah, I think, in the first two films, there's death. That's not a theme that we see in Call Me By Your Name. However, the death of a relationship is still there, and that grief is still there. However, this theme of pursuing desire is not always necessarily going to be perfect. I don't know. It's not, I don't know, following that desire of like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, but I'm doing it because something is pulling me to do it. You know, watching Emma follow Antonio through the streets, and she's like, what is she doing? Does she have a plan? What is, like, she has no plan. She's like, she just randomly saw him on the street, and she's like, oh my God, I've got to follow him. I've got to like do something. And it's exciting, but sometimes that excitement turns into like devastating consequences.
Yeah, there's an opportunity cost for desire. In following this desire, this impulse, this craving, what are you giving up in exchange for it?
Yeah.
I think Calling by Your Name is a great example of that, because Ilya wants to chase it, Oliver doesn't. And for a blending into his environment, he's giving up something that was enriching in his life and beautiful.
Yeah.
I want. There's also that it goes within the senses that Luca Guadagnino elicits. How he moves the camera. We talked earlier that in I Am Love, the camera seems to be yearning for more, and you see that a lot in Call Me by Your Name, especially. Luca Guadagnino shot that, I think, exclusively on a 35mm camera.
Yeah, he typically
Or 35
only
millimeter
uses
lens.
35, I think.
Yes, and it was just the way it moved and the way it would show nature and sense. You would feel present in every scene, very intimate. You'd feel the intimacy. You would feel the emotions that the characters were feeling as well. And there's a lot of camera motion in major films, Hollywood, you know, where there's action, drama, romance, whatever it is. But for a camera to be always searching in a human element, the camera as a character is a very powerful tool that I think Luca uses very well across the Desire trilogy.
Yeah, well, that actually brings a really good question that I wanted to ask you about. What are your thoughts on the filmmaking and style of Challengers versus these three films? Because I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear what your thoughts are first.
Well, Challengers, very sexually tense film, as most of Luca Guadagnino's films.
Yeah.
That the form of that is quite different because you could tell it was made for a more Hollywood market, but it still has Luca's sensibilities. In that one, the camera is still very, how do you put it? It's not yearning as much as it is, honestly, competitive, I guess I could say. Well, that just goes within the genre of a sport film, but the formalistic elements of Challengers is sort of to, well, the music in Challengers is very charged. It's very different from the music he uses in the Desire trilogy.
Very different, in my opinion, yeah.
The Reznor and Ross, you know, it's very pulsating, it's youthful, it's energetic, it's new. And he uses silence a lot in the scenes between Tashi and Art. In their relationship when they're older, there's not a lot of love or passion. It's more, what do you want me to do? It's tiring, it's exhausting. And when...
but it's comfortable.
But there is a level of comfort in it too,
Yeah.
right? Yet when you see Josh O'Connor's character, he's always, you know, grinning. There's always like an intimacy. You feel close. Yet with Art and Tashi, you feel far away.
I do think, though, that intellectually or emotionally you feel far from Josh O'Connor's character.
Ooh, that's a great point.
Whereas with my brain is like with Art, you are much more emotionally close, I think, with him in a way, I think, or his emotions are more at the forefront of his character. Where maybe he doesn't need to say exactly everything with Tashi, whereas I think, but there's not that same passion.
Right.
Whereas with Patrick, like, his emotions are not, he's not very emotionally intelligent, I think.
No, that I would agree.
Yeah, he's a bit immature, and Tashi does not like that, but she does find it sexually appealing.
Yeah, it's they each offer her half of what she needs, you could say.
Yeah, they I feel like yeah, but going back, I think for me like I watched Challengers hoping that it would be like these other three films, and in a lot of ways, like now that I've watched it several times, like I notice the similarities in Lucas filmmaking. However, it is a very Hollywood style, like
Yes.
and it's obviously a sports film, so it's very like the camera is competitive with who it gives time to. It's very fast. It's the energy is much more alive. But I think in that energy, we've lost the sensuality
Yes.
that these three films have. Like every moment lingers. Every like in these three films, like the music and the way that the camera moves just brings its own sensuality to this story and emphasizes it. And I just didn't get that same feeling with Challengers. I think the story was very emotionally charged, but I think it was very focused on being sensational. Like not sensual. Like
Right. I agree very much so with that.
yeah.
I didn't relate to Challengers nearly as much as I did with the Desire trilogy. I saw Call Me by Your Name years ago. I saw Challengers twice, I believe, and recently I rewatched the Desire trilogy. But in Challengers, the through line between that and the Desire trilogy, I found a lot of the time was the light and the showing of the physicality of the characters, like their bodies in the same way. But it was very different. The sensual nature that you would see in the Desire trilogy is not so much in Challengers. I believe because that's not what the studio wanted to have in the film. But I find that to be Luca Guadagnino's probably most powerful tool and his most signature element.
Yeah.
And without that, I was left wanting, I believe.
Yeah, I felt a little unfulfilled, I think. And I think there was a lot left that the characters never really said, that the camera didn't necessarily say for them either.
Right. It moved differently from another Luca Guadagnino style film.
Yeah, so
There was also, in Challengers, I found there was a bit too much product placement. It was a bit too commercial. Every moment there was pushing of a company, a brand, and you could say it's because the characters want to. There's a status in what they do. They're rich kids. There's always an element of wealth in Luca Guadagnino films. Yet in the other films, it was it was like a humble sort of wealth.
yeah.
It was a less, they are satiated in terms of material possessions, and in Challengers it's sort of, there's an element of want in that.
Yeah, it's definitely also more modern. Whereas a lot of these films are, I believe, like Call Me by Your Name is set in the 80s. I Am Love and A Bigger Splash are around the same time, 90s maybe,
I believe
2000s,
something.
but not exactly today.
Yes.
Whereas that's clearly different for Challengers. It's very like modern, very cityscape, like American cityscape too. It's not Italian.
Yeah.
These films, this trilogy really highlights the Italian landscape, the Italian culture, in the way that people are close with each other in Italy. A kiss on the cheek, a hug. In America, we really...
There's a culture of warmth in Italy that we lack.
Yes. We don't, hug people goodbye very often. Like, maybe, some, but definitely not a kiss, really, unless you're older and it's, like, your grandmother, But I haven't really experienced that.
I'm of Sicilian descent. I have Sicilian ancestry. My great-grandparents couldn't even speak English and they never did, even after they immigrated. So yeah, I noticed, growing up, I had that sort of element of warmth. You kiss your parents hello and goodbye, you always hug, that sort of thing. Then with your friends, it's entirely different. And that's a great point to bring up, because in the Desire trilogy, there's always an element of, proximity, closeness, tight-knit through body language. Yet in Challengers, besides the very sexual scenes, there's sexual tension, but there's not like an element of physical warmth.
Yeah.
Just due to it being set in America, likely.
Yeah.
I also, though, in Challengers, there's an absence of nature that you would see in the Desire trilogy that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about nature being the environment in which characters are allowed to sort of release their true selves, find their true selves, take their mask off, whatever you would like to say. In Challengers, the replacement of that was the tennis court. They're allowed to be themselves on the court, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It didn't do the same... It didn't have the same deep connection that it had with nature. I think just because nature is such a universal emblem that unless you were an athlete, you might not be able to feel that same connection.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think even in... I didn't really, I think, relate to the music in Challengers. I heard from several other people I talked to that they really enjoyed the music in it.
Right.
Personally, for me, I was missing that, like, orchestral, like, classic kind of music that we saw in these other three films. Whereas in Challengers, it was very, like, techno beats, kind of,
Yes.
or there would be, like, a church song kind of thing going on at weird moments. I didn't really get that part. I think it was maybe to do with, like, a loss of innocence kind of thing.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it didn't click with me in the same way, because I love a good, like, classical or, like, orchestral music to really, like, that really, I think, honed in on these emotions that we saw in Call Me By Your Name and in, the other two films, that I kind of felt like was missing with Challengers for me, to kind of emphasize that desire and that yearning. I think there was too much going on for me in that film.
Yes.
Whereas these films are much slower, much more methodical. Challengers felt very fast, very...
the editing style is different.
Yeah, very different editing, very different music, very different vibe.
Right. I think that one of the biggest differences in a film like Challengers versus, let's say, I Am Love, my favorite image and sequence in I Am Love is when Emma first goes to Antonio's home, and they're in the garden, they're picking fruit, and then the camera goes out. There's a moment where she's going through the grass and the trees, and you hear the birds and the sunlight, and it's a very eliciting moment. And they kiss when they're out of focus. It's very sudden. You don't expect it, but that's what desire, pursuing this sort of compulsion leads to. It's that unexplainable feeling that he was able to articulate through visuals, and it was fantastic. And the visuals in Challengers were you could tell it was going to happen. It, the pacing, the tension, it was all culminating into a moment, but it felt a little more, it felt less pure. It was very much so charged with underlying motives and a bit more sort of, you could say, dirty intentions, and which is purposeful. That's what those characters all, they're very different relationships, yet that was a difference I couldn't help but notice. It's that how visually, like, the attraction element was displayed in Challengers was never sort of pure or enriching their lives in my eyes. It was very much so destructive for everybody involved.
Yeah. I agree.
So
Yeah. I think I want to go into a little bit more with the music, because music is such a key element in Luca Guadagnino's, like, Desire trilogy. It helps shape these films with emphasizing the emotions, the nature, the beauty, the architecture. While other music, like, does play sometimes, where it's diegetic or non-diegetic, one, common thread between all three is this, like, orchestral classical style.
In the set.
This is a question about the John Adams music. it looks as the whole thing was truly scored, although there were pieces from Nixon in China. Can you talk about the music and working? He did the score for this, or all the music that's placed in.
The music and the house, they, in a way, existed before I ever met these two elements. The way I describe the house in the script, it's exactly the way you see the house in the reality. And when I found this place called Villa Necchi Campiglio, and the family is called Recchi, but before that, it's a nice coincidence. I was completely, oh my God, overwhelmed by this match. And when I got 5 years ago a present from a great mentor of mine, the late Gareth Wigan, who passed out a couple of months ago. And I got this CD from John Adams, Naive and Sentimental Music. And I put the CD, it was my birthday. I remember I was in Madrid and I put this, and I was already working on I Am Love, the script, and I heard this music and I said, oh my God, this is what I never heard, but this is what I really was looking for. I don't feel comfortable in working with composers of soundtrack because it's a process too short for me. I don't understand how you can make a soundtrack in 2-3 weeks when you have musicians who work for years into a composition. And also I don't like the idea that a composer arrives after the director, you know? He composes after. It's there is sort of imposition of a personality over the movie that I don't think it's right for the movie. And not because I want to control every aspect, but because the movie has a sort of necessity of independence from the will of anyone else than the movie itself. I don't know if I expressed myself clearly, but sorry. And when I heard John Adams, I became obsessed and I started to study John Adams. I bought all the CDs I could. I read the books. I went to see his operas. I remember an amazing night in Verona watching Nixon in China with all these old ladies shocked still by John Adams, which is nice. And I started to rewrite the script on the music, to try to find pieces of music to fit scenes. And during the shoot, we used the music loud, like in a musical. You know, you were shooting on the music. Everybody were tuning their work on the music. Tilda, the other actors, and the grip was pulling the camera at the same pace of the music. And so we were in problem. We were in danger because what if John Adams didn't want to allow us to use this music? Yeah. We had to have some Italian cheap composer on board. If I think now, I'm scared of that. And then we approached Adams. Tilda wrote a mail to Adams. She had somebody who knew him. And he was amazing. He said, oh, go ahead and show me the movie when you have it. And we showed the movie to Mr. Adams, and he said, I like it, it's fantastic, go ahead.
All three films are following characters that exist within the upper ring of life, often very wealthy, very educated. And so this classical music also fuels kind of that air that they have about them, and also fuels the emotions within the scene, building tension and desire and love and longing. In Call Me By Your Name, Elio has a passion for classical music, and spends his long summer days transcribing music between instruments. And there's this style shift from film to film in terms of the tone of the orchestra. And in I Am Love, the music is very light, but it's very fast. It builds tension. And it doesn't, however, often come to a climax, the music. It's kind of in these in-between moments where it's like kind of really going and you're like, is something going to happen? And then it kind of just fades out.
Dissipates.
Yeah. So it kind of builds that tension throughout, that you know that things are happening, but whereas, in A Bigger Splash, there's a lot more, I think, diegetic music. They're playing music, they're singing, or things like that. There's definitely still this, like, occasional orchestral music that kind of emphasizes some of these scenes that Marianne has, or where, she's out, because music definitely, like, fuels her life.
Right.
Most similar to I Am Love was Call Me By Your Name with, like, the music. and the film uses music as a tool to express Elio's repressed emotions. And when the music is not like a classic music, like he loves Bach and Liszt, and he talks about those. However, this film used many songs written by Sufjan Stevens, who is an American singer-songwriter. So while the music in the other two films is often just instrumental, Call Me By Your Name, there's also this heavy emphasis on the lyrical and the beautiful lyrics that Sufjan Stevens, came up with that really gives emphasis to Elio's like inner turmoil, I think. So yeah, I think that like that theme of music throughout these films is really, for me, what tied it together, that makes this a trilogy. The filmmaking and the music were the biggest things that really tied them in, because they're all different stories about desire. But as soon as, like, I had already watched Call Me By Your Name, and as soon as I Am Love started, and it was like music, the music picked up, I was like, this is it. This is like, that's the same thing. And obviously the story's different, the characters are different, but that feeling it gives you of like something's happening, kind of like, okay, this is going to be good. Like the sensuality of it from the beginning just really, really makes me, it excites me, to have a film give the same feel as another film by the same director. It's, it just feels great that, that they're so similar and yet so different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderfully put. Yeah, absolutely. I was interested to see, how do you think the use of music in A Bigger Splash, because that's more, 70s, 80s music, there's the karaoke scene, there's bits of other types of music. How do you think do you find that more effective than the music used in, let's say, Challengers?
I don't know. I think it was more effective in some ways because music was more important to characters, to like Marianne as a character, because she's been silenced, her voice, and obviously she's a singer. And so in a lot of ways, I think they threw in diegetic music over non-diegetic music, so that like it is, she's hearing it. It's not just like over a scene. It's like she's hearing this music. Or Harry's playing music, or they're singing but she can't really sing. I don't know. I think for me, Challengers, the music, I didn't always feel like it fit the scene, or it fit the scene but maybe it didn't add what I wanted it to add to the scene. I think maybe I would have preferred it slow it down and instead it sped it up, or kind of like that. I think it didn't give me the feelings that I wanted it to. Maybe it did for other people, but for me, it didn't quite match what I was looking for in those, I think.
Right.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think that with Challengers, the music sort of played as it more served the pacing and tension than it did the interiority of the characters.
I agree.
And in the Desire trilogy, it displays the interiority of the characters extremely well. Each film, the jazz and the classical in I Am Love, the range of music in A Bigger Splash, and then the classical and bits of Sufjan Stevens, you said?
Yes.
Yes, his music was that juxtaposition was very good, because it was both like classical, the old world that they're in, and the new sensations, the new feelings, that are coming out of him. And so the intention paid off very well in understanding the characters and just the feelings the film was trying to elicit.
Yeah. It just makes me so happy. And I think I've also grown with the film, I think, in a lot of ways, and seen different perspectives now that I'm older. In a lot of ways I was like, that is love. That is love. And now I kind of look at it and I'm like, that was desire. And that was love, but it wasn't necessarily maybe healthy.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily something that we should model our own love upon in a lot of ways. And I think I've grown in a lot of ways to see the way that Oliver was not good for Elio, was not, maybe not necessarily not good, but not aware of the impact that he was going to have on Elio's life.
Right.
He was older, and while he enjoyed it, he was not in love with Elio.
He was slightly more calloused, less vulnerable.
Yes. But we don't really see that, I think, in a lot of ways because the film is from Elio's perspective. And I think it would have been really interesting to see this film from both perspectives, because I think it would have changed the way that we saw a lot of it. And so I think as I've grown, I've kind of thought more about what Oliver's perspective would have been. The scenes that we saw from Elio's perspective and how those might have been different. So I think that's all I have to say. I think these three films are so incredible, and the filmmaking by Luca Guadagnino is just so great. And I'm really excited to see Queer, because I think that that's gonna, also open up a lot of the themes that we talked about with sexuality throughout all three of these films, and obviously specifically Call Me by Your Name. Although I Am Love and A Bigger Splash definitely had pieces of sexuality represented within them, and that's a theme that Luca Guadagnino does not shy away from. Any final thoughts?
Well, we talked about food towards the end, and I think that Luca Guadagnino is trying to say that in the way that food is essential for the human body to function, love is essential for, I guess you could say the soul or the spirit. And without it, we are very little.
I think that's great. That's a great way to end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It was my pleasure.